Every NFL season, there's always a handful of teams that just don't live up to the expectations we had for them coming into the season. So in this video, I want to talk about the 8 NFL teams who have underperformed expectations in the 2025 NFL season. Subscribe and like the video if you guys do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. Now, before we get into our list, I do have one honorable mention. It's a team that has a positive record, but they're just not reaching that level we thought they could hit, and that's the Buffalo Bills. The Bills have played an extra game compared to everyone else, and they just lost to the Houston Texans. I came into the season, especially after what they did in week 1 versus a thought to be great Ravens team. I was thinking this was a team that had the potential chance to get the #1 seed in the AFC. And it wasn't just me who thought this. It feels like everyone out there thought it would be the case. But here we are. They're 7-4, and they have a lot of flaws on the roster. They're not a bad team. They're just not where we thought they might be. With that said, we are going to begin at number 8 with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, these are in no particular order, but the Minnesota Vikings have been disappointing. So far on the season, they are currently sitting at 4-6, coming off a year where they were 14-3. You let go of Sam Darnold. You think you might have a potential upgrade with the young quarterback who got to sit behind Darnold for a year, who's had time to develop, mature, and clean up some of his issues in JJ McCarthy. It hasn't worked out. JJ McCarthy has been one of the worst starting quarterbacks in all of football this year. In fact, there's an argument to be made that he is the worst starting quarterback in football. He's inaccurate. His mechanics are bad. His pocket presence hasn't been great. There's just a lot of flaws to his game. And this is a team that I've talked about several times throughout the season. They are in win now mode. This is not a team that can afford to sit around and wait for their quarterback to develop. They have guys that are all in their prime, ready to go all in on a playoff run. As we saw last year by their 14-3 record, they're good enough to be a double-digit win team. They just need the quarterback. They let go of Darnold. Darnold's now playing incredible for Seattle. And JJ, unfortunately, just has not lived up to the expectations. Right now, they're dead last within their division, a division that has the likes of the Detroit Lions, the Green Bay Packers, and the rising Chicago Bears. And Minnesota is starting to feel like the team that is starting to fall behind a little bit, despite having a roster that's arguably the most talented of the group. But because they picked that developmental quarterback, let him sit for a year, and then he hasn't fully developed yet, it's causing the team to not be great this year. Now, they are a competitive team. They have talented pieces. They can go toe-to-toe with anybody, but they're usually not going to be able to win these games because they just don't have the quarterback to get them there. Now, I also don't just want to put all the blame on JJ McCarthy. There has been other issues with this team. The run game hasn't been consistent this year. The offensive line has dealt with injuries. The interior defensive line hasn't been as good as maybe what they thought it was going to be. Like, they've had other issues on the roster, but biggest issue of all is the quarterback. And had they had a Sam Darnold there at quarterback, you could potentially overcome some of the other things that are not as good as maybe what you thought they were going to be. The ground game, the offensive line, some pieces defensively. Like, if you had a good quarterback, maybe they could make up for it, or maybe they could elevate the talent around them. But it's just been too far consistent of how bad McCarthy has looked, especially in big time moments in big time games. So unfortunately for the Minnesota Vikings, a team that came into the year as some people's favorites to win the division. I heard some people even talk about them making a deep playoff run. Like, there was a lot of anticipation for this Vikings team. They're 4-6, and unless they have a quick turnaround, it's not looking very good the rest of the way. Next up at number 7, let's talk about the Miami Dolphins. Now, I do want to say this. The Miami Dolphins are actually starting to play a lot better football. They're on a 2-game winning streak. They've won a lot of games in the past couple weeks. They're playing a whole lot better. However, they put themselves in a big, massive hole, and there's a lot of reasons for it. They're 4-7 on the year. I do think they're going to finish the year off probably like 7-9 or 6-10. But even if they are able to get around that 500 mark, it would still be a very disappointing season. The Dolphins have pretty consistently the past few years, despite being, pretty inconsistent, especially when it comes to going up against high-level competition. They have been a team that has been able to get to the playoffs and, make some noise around that level. And I would say this year, that was kind of the expectations. Get around that 500 mark, maybe exceed it by a little bit, be 10-7, 11-6, make the playoffs, and probably lose in the first round. Like, that was the expectations for this team. But they're way below 500. They were like one of the worst teams in football to start the season off. Now, it looks like they're potentially heading towards a full rebuild with new head coach, new quarterback. Like, that's the level of bad it got in the beginning half of the season. It has picked up, and I think Dolphins fans maybe have a little bit more hope than what they had to begin the season. but it still feels like they're inevitably going to have to reset the roster and reset the coaching staff and all that stuff. So for a Dolphins team that came into the season with potential playoff hopes, with the potential to compete for the division, to make a wild card spot, and if a few things go your way, maybe you're making a playoff run, like that was the expectation for this team. It just hasn't really been the case. Now, we knew coming into the season, the offensive line was not going to be great, but they did add some pieces. You have Patrick Paul stepping into a bigger role. You drafted Jonah Savaiinaea and hoping he's going to step it up. Jonah hasn't been good. Patrick Paul's actually been pretty good at tackle. You had Tyreek Hill, you had Jalen Waddle, A-Chain, and Tua. The thought process was this was going to be a pretty damn good offense with a pretty subpar defense. And unfortunately, to start the year off, it was we have a shitty offense and a shitty defense. And as it's kind of gone on, the offense has gotten a little bit better, and actually the defense has been pretty good too. The defensive line to start the season off could not stuff anything, but now the defensive line kind of what feels like overnight has actually become a pretty good run stuffing unit. The secondary that was coming into the season had a lot of questions, and even though there's still a lot of questions to answer, it has been a little bit better. So Miami's done a better job, but again, given where our expectations were for this team, they have underperformed quite a bit. Again, we thought they'd be a plus 500 team, maybe making the playoffs. Hasn't really been the case. Next up at number 6, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons are 3-7, and it's not like they have been this really great football team the past couple years, because last year they were 8-9, and it feels like for the past 50 years, minus the Super Bowl run, they've kind of just been that average football team, that 8-9, 9-8 level team. But heading into the season, with Michael Penix showing flashes last year, with a second year of Raheem Morris, with another draft class where you add more pieces to that defensive line, a draft class in which, by the way, they traded a first-round pick in next year's draft class, which is going to be a top 10 pick now, to get that guy in James Pierce Jr., and it's just been a colossal failure. And it's been a weird year for the Falcons because at times you can kind of see the vision coming to fruition. Like you can see, all right, Penix is getting the ball down the field. Drake London's making plays. Bijan's making plays. Kyle Pitts is making plays. Hey, Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr., they're showing some flashes of being good pass rushers. We have some juice defensively. The secondary's looking good. But then it's just all falling apart. And now we're sitting at a team now that's 3-7, does not have their own first-round pick, and they're likely going to be in for a reset at head coach probably yet again. Because the expectation for this team was to take that next step, compete for the division, win double-digit games, get into the wild card, and make some noise, show that gradual growth, and they just haven't done it. You also throw into the fact that their young quarterback, I believe, has a partially torn ACL, which, if I'm not mistaken, he's already had past injuries with his knees in the past. So we're looking at a quarterback who is not young, like he's a 25, 26-year-old quarterback who's had multiple knee injuries and multiple injuries in general, who also just didn't look great or comfortable within the system. And you've invested so much into him with that first-round pick, and then trading your future first-round pick in 2026 to add to that defense to give the team a better chance of competing right away, and it's been a colossal F-up. Like, completely, they have F'd it up. So now you look at Atlanta, they've underperformed this year with the play on the field, and it's not likely going to get a ton better next year because they don't have the first-round pick to add that future young talent. Now, they're probably, again, going to hire a new head coach, and I do think that could help out this Falcons team. I would hire some smart offensive mind that can build an offense around Penix and all these weapons, especially Bijan and London. But still, given where our expectations were, this has been a colossally bad season. And it's not like the NFC South is ridiculously stacked. If the Falcons were a competitive football team, sitting at 6-4 or 7-3, they would be in contention for this division. Like, the lead of the division is the Buccaneers, who are 6-4 and likely to be 6-5 if they lose to the LA Rams. Like, look at the Carolina Panthers, for example. That is a team that has found a way to ascend and get better, and they're in a really tough race to potentially win the entire division. Now, granted, I don't think they will. I do think Tampa Bay will find a way to win it, but I'm still saying the Panthers have overachieved expectations, whereas the Atlanta Falcons, the team that everyone, including myself, had hope would take that next step, has just not taken the step. They've actually taken a big step back, which is not good for this franchise. The only good thing I'll say, they're a fairly youngish football team, so they have some years to grow and figure it out. It's not like they are 32 years old, all in their prime and, washed, but this is a football team that has some time on their hands. It's just disappointing that this year they were nowhere near where we thought they were going to be. Next up at number 5, we have the Washington Commanders. So last year, it's pretty safe to say they overachieved last year in Jaden's rookie year. They were a team that went 12-5, kind of out of nowhere, because the previous year they drafted, I think, 2nd overall, drafted Jaden Daniels, brought in a new head coach, brought in a bunch of free agents, went on that magical 12-5 run that ended in an NFC Championship loss, and then they went all in this year, bringing in guys like Laramie Tunsil, Deebo Samuel, Von Miller, Marshawn Lattimore the previous season. Like, this was a team that brought in a whole bunch of veterans to the team, and it's just not been good. Now, there's a lot of reasons why the Commanders are 3-8 today. The biggest of all just being the injuries. I don't think it's fair to call the Commanders a complete disaster because they have had injuries flooded throughout the roster. McLaurin has missed a lot of time. Deebo has missed a lot of time. They've had injuries on the offensive line. Their quarterback, Jaden Daniels, has been injured for the most of the season. But the issue with that is that because of the previous regime, the regime prior to Dan Quinn, the roster was so void of talent that when the new regime came in, they went on a spending spree to basically overhaul the entire roster. But in doing so, they didn't have the depth. And that's not really this regime's fault. It's the past regime's fault for not being able to supply this team with the necessary depth. But then you take into account all of their draft picks they've had to spend in the past couple draft classes under Dan Quinn. They've had to get the guys to play, right? And the guys that are asked to be depth pieces, they haven't really been able to fill those roles. So when a guy like Jaden Daniels, McLaurin, Deebo, just keep going down the list of all the injuries, you're now asking the backups to play a bigger role, and the backups just are not good. There's other teams out there that could survive major injuries because they've been stacking together quality draft classes where the 4th, 5th, 6th round picks ends up panning out as solid backups, and they can step into a role any given night. That's not been the case for the Commanders. When the Commanders have an injury, they have to replace it with somebody that's just not built to be a starter. And then in addition to that, even when they were quote unquote healthy, they weren't like this unbeatable football team. They looked very beatable. Like, let's just be honest. They looked very, very beatable. It is just a shame the injuries have come into fruition. Like, coming into the season, my expectations were fairly low. I did think Washington was going to make the playoffs. I thought they'd be like a 10-7 team that makes it in as like the 7th seed in the playoffs. That was my expectations. And I would say my expectations were pretty close to everyone's expectations. I don't think anyone thought they were going to win the division or anything close to that. But most of us thought they would be a 10, 11, 12 win team that makes it into the wild card and probably doesn't make a deep run, but makes 1 or 2 rounds deep. Like, that's what my expectation was, and that was what most of our expectations were. But now we're looking at a team that's 3-8, likely to end up with a top 10 pick. And frankly, I think that's actually a good thing for this team. They're an older roster, like truly one of the oldest rosters in football. Getting a top 10 pick and potentially trading back to get even more draft capital to get younger pieces into the roster, I think would benefit them a ton. I also think they should just start getting rid of some of these older players, the Bobby Wagners, the Von Millers, all the Deebo Samuels, like the guys that are just not who they used to be. I would get off those contracts just to let younger guys play. Fully go into a younger core around Jaden Daniels and see how it works out next year. So that's just what I would do. But yeah, we'll talk about that later in the offseason. Next up at number 4, we have the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the Raiders were not a good football team last year. They were 4-13. And I don't think any of us thought the Raiders were going to contend for the division or anything close to that. But when you look at what they did in the offseason, bringing in Geno Smith, bringing in Pete Carroll, making a flashy draft pick in Ashton Genty, and all the other subtle moves they made, and it's just completely flopped. Like, utterly flopped. All the veterans they brought in has completely failed them. And then defensively, like, this was a bad defense last year. It's an even worse defense this year. But they had guys, Trevon Moehrig, Robert Spillane, dudes that are now playing elsewhere. Robert Spillane playing for the Patriots, being really good for them. Trevon Moehrig helping that Panthers defense turn their defense around. But you look at it, you're like, man, if we had kept those guys in this defense, we would have guys on all 3 levels that we could trust on. Max Crosby, Robert Spillane, Trevon Moehrig, and that just makes it a little bit easier to fix their holes. But you let those guys walk in free agency, even though you had money to retain them, which was bizarre. And then the entire team around them has just completely failed, right? It has completely failed. The Geno Smith experience has been a colossal F-up. He has been terrible this year. frankly, he's been one of the worst quarterbacks in football. Now, I don't think he's been as bad as McCarthy or maybe Dylan Gabriel, but he's been really freaking bad. Genty has not been able to get going because this offensive line that I would say most of us thought was going to be, I don't know, average to slightly below average. They have been probably the worst offensive line in football. The receiving corps has not been great. Brock Bowers has been injured the entire year. I mean, he's came back the past few weeks, but he's been banged up for the majority of the season. And this defense can't stop nothing. And this team is now 2-8 with a veteran head coach and a veteran quarterback who's under contract for the next few years. And it feels like there's a chance that Pete Carroll might be gone after just 1 year. The thought process, at least my thinking for the thought process of Las Vegas, was bring in stability, bring in guys that can just keep this team above water, make the fans happy that we're a competitive football team once again. Because Pete Carroll has a history of winning, Geno Smith has a history of winning with Pete Carroll, and we think, quote unquote, we have a good enough roster to work around them. We bring in Genty to add to this run game. We have Brock Bowers. We think we have a decent enough offensive line. And even though the defense will not be great this year, we did add some pieces in the draft, and you have Max Crosby there. But the guys on defense have not panned out outside of Max Crosby, and there's been some bright spots there. It's not all been terrible defensively. But then you look at the offense, and it's just been completely terrible. And I think there's a legitimate chance that they have to clean house again, which is just terrible. It is just utterly terrible. You also look at their draft class. Those guys are not playing. They are not playing the Jack Beshes of the world. They're not playing the 2 young offensive linemen they drafted. Like, they're not playing the young guys they drafted, which makes me kind of question, like, why are they not playing? You're a 2-8 ball club. Why is Jack Besh not out there? Why are we not starting these other offensive linemen? I get it, they're young, but you have nothing to lose. You're 2-8. Let's give them some reps because in the future, they might be called upon to be starters for this team. It's just bizarre. They are one of the worst teams in football. Again, I didn't have expectations of them to win the division or make the playoffs. I was thinking like 9-8 was a real possibility, which would have been a good season for Raiders fans. They're 2-8, and they have a legit shot at the #1 pick, which is crazy to think about. Next up at number 3, let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens. So I am recording this, I guess, in the week number 12, before the Ravens have played their week 12 game. And the Ravens are on a 4-game winning streak, and they are starting to turn their season around. Defensively, they have played a lot better the past few weeks, and with Lamar Jackson back on offense, they have found some stability there. Still, though, they're 5-5. And the expectation coming into the season for this Ravens team was Super Bowl or bust. Like, when I was coming into the season, I want to say they were my #1 or #2 team in my power rankings. Like, I legit thought the Ravens had a chance to be the best team in football. And after week 1, I still felt fairly confident that I was right about the Ravens because, yes, they lost to Buffalo, but it was a really close game. And, you know, Baltimore probably should have won that game if you actually watched it. The Bills came back from a double-digit deficit with like 3 minutes left. It was crazy. But then everything just kind of fell apart. Lamar Jackson got hurt. They were losing games. They had a huge deficit within the division. And then Lamar came back. They started to steady the ship a little bit and play a little bit better. But again, even if this team does finish the year off like 10-7 or 11-6 and make the playoffs, I still would say they have underperformed because this was a team that consensusly was a top 5 team in the NFL and a top 5 team in terms of chances to win the Super Bowl. Like, everyone thought, hey, it's Kansas City, it's Buffalo, it's Philly, it's the Lions, and it's the Baltimore Ravens. Like, those are the teams that are probably going to win it this year. But Baltimore just hasn't been great this year. They have a ton of issues. To start the year off, the defense couldn't stop nothing. It's gotten better. It's gotten a lot better, but still there's some question marks about the competition level and what happens when they go up against great offenses. What is the defense going to look like? And then the offensive line has just not been what they thought it was going to be. It's not to say they are horrendous or anything like that, but they are just not good, frankly. The run game has been very inconsistent. Lamar Jackson himself has, I feel like, still is hindered a little bit by the injury. He just doesn't look like his full self, but I think the offensive line has something to do with that. I've heard some Ravens fans talk about just how bad the interior offensive line is shown at times. And I mean, that happens. That happens. That's life. But again, expectations-wise, coming into the year, this was a team that had a chance to win a Super Bowl. As we sit here today, I don't think the Ravens are a team that are going to win the Super Bowl this year. They might make the playoffs. They might even win their division, which is crazy to think about, especially where they were, they were 1-5 at one point or something crazy like that. They've steadied the ship, but still. Next up at number 2, let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals. So last year, the Cardinals went 8-9. And then after an offseason of quote unquote Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler Murray figuring out their chemistry, and they're going to have a draft class where Walter Nolan, Will Johnson, you add even all these pieces defensively with Calais Campbell, Josh Sweat, etc., etc. The thought process was the Cardinals have figured it out. They're going to be a better football team. But they're 3-7 now. And it's just been terrible, especially the offense. Now, defensively, they have shown life. Now, the past few weeks, it has been quite ugly because they've been dealing with some injuries. But prior to all the injuries and all that, nonsense, the defense has taken a step forward. I would say a sizable step forward. Will Johnson's looked great in the secondary. Walter Nolan has shown flashes. Calais Campbell's worked out. Josh Sweat has worked out. It's not a perfect unit. I think they need some help linebacker-wise, but the defense has taken a big step forward. But the offense hasn't. In fact, the offense has taken a sizable step back. Kyler Murray, to start the year off, he had moments, he had glimpses, but it was far too inconsistent. Then they had to throw Jacoby Brissett out there. They have officially shut down Kyler for the rest of the season. And now you're looking at a team that coming into the season, I thought had a chance of making the playoffs. They're now 3-7. They have a legit shot at a top 10, top 5 pick. And they're probably getting off their quarterback, Kyler Murray. There's a legit chance they trade Kyler Murray elsewhere or cut him. I don't know what they're going to do with him there, but I don't think he's going to be a Cardinal next year, which is crazy to think about. Again, maybe I was drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit with them, but you went 8-9. You had a really good offseason for your defense, and now you're 3-7. That's just kind of the volatility of football. That's just kind of how it is. And it's a shame because this team felt like under Jonathan Gannon was ascending, taking one step, another step, next step, next step. And this was supposed to be the year they took that step into being a fringe wild card team, or maybe being a wild card team. But they've just they've just fallen down the stairs. They're back squarely at what feels like step 1 or 2. Which is a shame because I feel like there's talent on this team, and that's why they're one of my biggest underperformers, because this team feels like there's pieces here that should be good, but they're not. And I get it, they're in a super tough division, but they're losing games to teams they should beat. That's just been the case this year. So it's been disappointing for Arizona, very disappointing. And I'm scared for their future because San Francisco should be better next year. Seattle and LA are going to be good for quite some time. So I kind of feel bad for Arizona. But at my number 1, and again, no particular order, let's talk about the Kansas City Chiefs. So let me say this. Could Kansas City still make the playoffs? 1,000%. I'll also say this. If Kansas City does make the playoffs, I'm probably still going to bet on them to make the AFC Championship game or even to potentially make the Super Bowl. That's just who the Chiefs are. But through 11 weeks of games, they're 5-5. They're at 500, and they're 4 games below the Denver Broncos, with the Broncos having a tiebreaker, and they lost to the LA Chargers, who are now 2 games in front of them. Even though the Chargers are starting to falter a little bit, and I do think Kansas City has a chance to overcome them, still, it does not look like they're going to win the division, which in my opinion is the number 1 red flag. Yes, the Denver Broncos have overperformed. They have been one of the best teams in football, and that defense for Denver that I thought was good has been way better than even I thought it was going to be. But Kansas City is still, they are the top class. They are the top dogs. They have been the team that has made it to the Super Bowl multiple years. They have been the team that have won Super Bowls. They have been the team that has dominated the AFC for the past several years. And now you look at this team, and guys, there is a very legitimate chance this Chiefs team doesn't even make the playoffs. Now, again, I think they will, but they very well could not. Let's be honest. They're 5-5. They have 7 games left. If they lose 2 or 3 more games, they're probably not going to make the playoffs. 10-7 might get you in. It might, but it also might not. And it's not like their schedule is a cakewalk. They have one of the best teams in football this week in the Indianapolis Colts, a Colts team that I think is really good and ready to be tested. And I think that Colts team could win that game. They have Dallas, they have the Chargers, and then they have the Broncos later in the season. And they have the Houston Texans, who are playing a lot better. The Texans just beat the Buffalo Bills. So if they lose 2, probably more like 3 games, a Chiefs team that just made it to a Super Bowl has a real chance of not making the playoffs. And the craziest thing about this all, when you actually break into the numbers here, they have a net point differential of plus 73. Plus 73. This is a competitive Chiefs team. They're not getting blown out. They're not getting, punched in the face and bullied. They're just losing. They are losing the 1-score games that they have previously won. Last year, they were so good in these 1-score games. These games that went down to crunch time. This year, it's not been the case. And there's a number of reasons why. Number 1, I do think there's been regression from Patrick Mahomes, and I do think there's been regression with Andy Reid. The play calling does not feel as sharp or crisp as it has been in years past. They feel a little bit more predictable. And Patrick Mahomes, like, look, he hasn't been Patrick Mahomes this year. He's missed some big time throws. And I also want to say this. The Chiefs' inability to run the football is something that I have been hammering home the entire season. They cannot run the football. And because they can't run the football, they're putting that much more pressure on Mahomes and Andy Reid to dial it up in the passing game when they just can't do it. They don't have the threats on the outside to consistently win. Now, they will score points because it's Mahomes, Reid, and the Chiefs, but they just don't have the firepower. And so I truly do believe this offseason they should go all in for a running back and, shoring up the offensive line. Like, that's what they have to do. And defensively, they've been good. Like, this has been one of the best defenses in football, but they have just not been able to win these one-score games. Again, if they make the playoffs, I'm still going to have a hard time betting against them, but they have been underperforming. They're 5-5 when everyone thought they had a real chance of making it to a Super Bowl and finding a way to win another one, which does not look very likely right now. But you guys let me know in the comment section below which NFL teams have been underperforming. Did I forget to mention one? You guys can let me know down below. And if you agree or disagree, let me know too. Hit that like and subscribe button. Road to 20,000. Love you guys.